it's that level of stress also. Like you talk about Marines in combat. I've watched combat hardened Marines, like legit, been there, done that Marines break down in tears on recruiting duty.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that served. I'm joined today by Shawn Murphy. He is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine story is the same. What is the same is the oath we all took. Shawn, I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it. Or Cindy, Tabitha, I appreciate it. See, look at that. I'm already so mess names up all the time.
But I just love it because it's nowhere near Tab or Tabitha. That's what makes it even better on that one. So the first question I always ask is, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
I I don't know how unique my story is for joining the Marine Corps, but I always knew I was going to do something uniform service wise. I went through when I was younger, it was the Navy, and I was like, oh, I'll join the Navy. I want to see the world, travel, those type of things. And what really ended up happening was my mom dated a guy who was a pilot in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, and he was, you know, I just saw this guy, and he wasn't real tall, he wasn't real muscular, but he was a tough guy. Like he definitely was somebody you knew you didn't mess with. I always remember he drank warm Pabst Blue Ribbon was what it was his beer of choice because in Vietnam that's what he had. So that's what he drank, and his influence on me as a teenager translated into I want to be that tough guy. I want to be that bad dude. So voila, I ended up joining the Marine Corps.
And then you became that.
That became my goal. Just not the warm Pabst Blue Ribbon.
And what MOS did you end up picking, and how did you kind of like make that decision?
So I actually had three MOSs in the Marine Corps. So I started off when I joined, I was a 3521 motor team mechanic, which worked out great for me. I took automotive technology. It kind of flowed together. I was a horrible diesel mechanic. I broke more than I ever fixed. Just wasn't a good job for me. And then I was in that time frame in the Marine Corps where we kind of transitioned from you could only like cutting scores nowadays. You can get promoted every month based on your cutting score. When I joined the Marine Corps, MOSs had certain quarters where you could get promoted. So it wasn't every month. Motor T, we might have been quarter one and quarter three. So you could have the cutting score, not have the cutting score, have it for a couple of months, and the next quarter come around and not have it. So that's a long way to get to. They changed it and I got promoted to corporal, and I was going to get out. And then I found out I could get out of motor T. I wasn't going to have to do this anymore. And I went and saw the career planner, or as we lovingly called it, career jammer. And I was like, hey, and I gave him like S2 because I was good, maybe Intel, small arms repair. I gave him all these like cool jobs in the Marine Corps. And he goes, how about avionics? And I'm like, what is that? He goes, oh, you'll love it. Electronic systems on CH-53 helicopters. I'm like, swing with the wing? He's like, oh, they work way harder than you understand. I'm like, and I tried to get the other MOSs and they wouldn't give it to me. So I ended up doing avionics. So I was a 6323 avionics. And in Marine Corps fashion, 2 years in the MOS, after spending a year almost in school, they sent me on recruiting duty. So I did recruiting for 3 years, came back to avionics as a staff sergeant at this point, and I just knew I was never going to pick a multimeter up again. It just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So I ended up um, lat going back on recruiting duty and did 12 of my 20 years was as a career recruiter. I was the guy out there doing everything from knocking on doors, asking what your plans were after high school to training Marines and command groups and working at maps. So I did every job short of the sergeant major and the CO in recruiting.
See, and I don't think people understand how wild that is. Recruiting duty is, and I was not a recruiter. I was a marketing and public affairs Marine on recruiting duty.
Okay.
But the hours and the work and the stress and the like I our sergeant major he had been on the drill field, like he had done, and he was like, I would not, like, he was like, recruiting duty is a million times worse than like all of it. I've had other guests on the podcast that they're just like worse in the sense of the amount. It's rewarding, right? And like there's, I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
you did it for 12 years. I mean, I can't imagine like how from that angle, like the ups and downs you went through. Can you talk about some of like that? Because I mean, that's recruiting duty, is just constant up and downs. It is not a steady calm.
It's a world of, you may have heard the phrase before, what have you done for me lately?
Yep.
Um, that is recruiting duty in a nutshell. It's, hey, I got 3 people to enlist this month. I'm doing great. And, you know, 30 September, you're on a 3. 1 October, you're back on a nut and you're a loser again. It's 0 to 0 every month. You can't go back to your command and be like, hey, you know what? This is a tough month. I didn't write anything this month, but last month I wrote 3. You're a loser, Marine. Marine, you are a loser. You didn't accomplish your goal. You you must have been slacking off. You must not have been preparing. You must have all these things. And it's that level of stress also. Like you talk about Marines in combat. I've watched combat hardened Marines, like legit, been there, done that Marines break down in tears on recruiting duty. Um, and some of it honestly is, and there's no better way to put this. Some Marines have spent their career behind their rank instead of in front of it. And what I mean by that is they let their rank dictate who they were instead of themselves dictating who they were and then bringing their rank. So when you get out and deal with civilians all day long and you're trying to tell Johnny or Susie, hey, come be a Marine, or explain to their parents, like, look, they're going to be fine. They don't have to listen to you. They don't care that you're Sergeant Bonats. They don't care that you're, you know, gunny gung ho. They don't care. You have to present yourself in a way that they go, okay, this person is trustworthy. This person I can work with. And for a lot of people, that's tough. And a lot of Marines, you can't just punch your way through that job. You have to be able to communicate with people. And that's what makes it so difficult.
And I think you also have to know your personality and how to portray it in a way to like these high schoolers and these educators that they know you're being authentic, you're not putting on a show, but then also like there's just like there's so much relationship building that goes beyond like the you're joining the Marine Corps, that I think a lot of recruiters struggled with that as well.
Yes.
Like not everybody can be in the Marine Corps. You still have to build a relationship because they're an influencer.
100%. It's funny you talk about the kids. I got 100 stories about things like that, but one that comes to mind. Uh, I was doing a leadership talk in a classroom all day long. We were going over JJ did Ty Buck and kind of running through it all day. And I'll never forget the kid I put in the Marine Corps. His name was Frank Zoika. Frank came to me after school and he goes, I was a staff sergeant at the time. He goes, staff sergeant, my buddy was in one of your classes. I was like, okay, why isn't he joining the Marine Corps? That's all I cared about. Why isn't he joining? He goes, he gave me some excuse. He goes, but my buddy said when he saw you at the start of the class, He went, he looked at you and said, I think I could whoop that dude's ass. He said, and then by the end of the class, he said, and I wouldn't ever put a hand on that guy. And it was interesting because I didn't do anything different. I carried myself the same way, but it's exactly what you're talking about. It's how did you carry yourself? Was I in front of my rank or was I behind my rank? And I always tried to put myself in front of it.
And I think the recruiters that did that were so much more successful. And then they were so much more successful too, again, because you're dealing with civilians. We're dealing with a whole
Yeah.
different structure. And when you're able to then take that whenever your transition finally comes, I think that like it's something that as veterans, like it sucks to say this, but your rank does not matter when you are a veteran, especially to civilians. Like it does not
Yeah.
hold. And that's kind of how recruiting duty is in a way. You're constantly one, recruiting stations
Yeah.
are pretty small. You're constantly working with people outside your rank, doing things and having to like
Oh,
meet the
yeah.
mission that I don't think you see on the same level in other places in the Marine Corps.
No, no, not at all. You're 100% correct.
What would you say is like I mean, you did recruiting for 12 years, like with all the stress and all the stuff. What was like the positive or the reason why you were able to stick with it and wanted to stick with it?
I believed in it. I believed in what I was doing. You know, we've all heard it. Hey, infantry is the backbone of the Marine Corps. Without us, you guys wouldn't matter. And everybody talks about who is the backbone. Oh, without admin, you guys wouldn't get paid. All this great. Sounds wonderful. Your recruiter is who you wanted to be. That was the first Marine you truly ever met. That is the Marine that dictated who you wanted to be at first. Even if you finally got in the Marine Corps and got into the fleet and you realize, dude, my recruiter sucked. And and you realize that later, and we all have that experience. I actually, funny enough, had one of my Marines. So I was recruited out of Baltimore. I grew up. That's where I grew up at.
Okay.
I had one of my Marines. I was probably in the Marine Corps. This would have been 2008. So I was like 14 years in the Marine Corps at this point. And I had one of my Marines come to me and say, "Hey, I interviewed this kid. His dad's a Marine." "Oh, yeah? What's his dad's name?" "Master Sergeant Bird." "Really?" "Yeah, he was a recruiter too, down in Baltimore." My recruiter interviewed one of my one of my Marines interviewed my recruiter's son, and this was in Pennsylvania because he was working at Willow Grove. Funny enough, but um, back to your original question, recruiting duty and sticking with it for 12 years. I knew what I influenced. I know that even though I've been out now 10 years, there are still Marines in the Marine Corps that if you went back through their service record, their SRB, my name is on there. My signature's on there. You go back to Marines that I enlisted in '01 that have just started, they've started to retire over the last few years. They may not necessarily remember my name. I hope they do. But when they look at their service record or somebody looks, my name's on there. Even as an operations chief, there was, we would do 400 and some. I'm trying to think how many kids we put in a year up in Albany. But all those kids we put up in Albany, every one of them that has an MOS, that was because of me. I I worked on that. I got them their MOS. I put the so yeah, it is a little bit of an ego trip, but I know that one of my legacies is I for 12 years influence the face of the Marine Corps and the fighting force of the Marine Corps. I can truly say that. And I don't think a lot of Marines think they can say it within their unit. They can say it within the time they were there. But I can honestly say the entire face of the Marine Corps for 12 years of my influence, there were people out there that I touched and they touched other Marines to change the look of the Marine Corps.
And see, I think that's so beautiful in the mindset. Like you could tell when recruiters had that mindset. You could tell by how their poolees were, the confidence they had, the things that like I like to this day, like I will never forget my Marine Corps recruiter, Gunner Sergeant Rodriguez. And I was one of those high school supply like calls like after graduation, right? And back when females didn't count as numbers, and like
Yes.
the amount of work he put in to get me into the Marine Corps and to get me the MOS that was like the one I wanted. And I say this all the time, and I don't think that everybody gets to say it. And I'm getting, this from you. Like, there's recruiters who put people in, and then there's recruiters who were the first mentors. And like, my recruiter was the first mentor. And that's what, like, how you're talking, that's how it feels like. That's the type of recruiter you were. You were their first mentor in the Marine Corps. You weren't just like their recruiter.
The Oath We Took podcast, hosted by Marine Corps veteran Tab Bartley, tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines who served. While every story is unique, the common bond is the oath they all took. Tune in Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio to catch these engaging conversations. Tab is also supporting the Military Women's Memorial through her Wreaths Across America sponsorship page. For every veteran's wreath you sponsor at wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took, $5 will go directly to the Military Women's Memorial, the leading memorial and education center honoring the commitment, contributions, and experiences of servicewomen. Once again, to donate, go to wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took.
That's it. And that was a goal, and that's also how that kid stayed in the delayed entry program. That's how they ended up still going to boot camp, because you didn't enlist them and then wait another 360 days before you talk to them again. And like, all right, you ready for boot camp? Like, no, we had pool functions every week. We were doing, I was picking up the phone and calling that kid, checking in with schools. How's the grades? Like, we did it all.
And I think
And
like, and for me, like my recruiter was such a like fatherly figure that was a like such a positive male role model that I think a lot of people also don't realize. For some kids, you guys may be the only example of what a positive male role model. And this is for the men and women who are enlisting, not just the men, right? Like
yeah.
oftentimes that is the first male that has treated them in a respectful way, that they haven't been concerned about, that they haven't had to, deal with some of these things, or like just in general, like you're in high school or post high school, like life is like your life is changing. And the role that a recruiter plays and the things that a recruiter even has to like discuss and deal with, I don't think we talk about that enough,
Oh
because
yeah.
it is.
I've had conversations with kids, everything from, I think my girlfriend's pregnant. My parents are getting a divorce. I can't go to boot camp. Uh, Real conversation that happened one time was, I had a kid come to me, and internet's still fairly young. This is 01, 02 time frame. Come to me and say, Staff Sergeant, I don't know if I can go to boot camp. My dad was just arrested crossing the border in a pedophile sting. That really happened. He went from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, was talking to somebody online that ended up being a New Jersey state trooper. And he was like, I don't know what I can't go, my mom. And I'm like, listen, bud, I was like, you ain't a cop, you ain't a judge, and your parents have to work out their own business. You're a grown ass man. He was in his 20s. I was like, you need to go to boot camp. And he was like, you're right. And he went to boot camp. But but who in their lifetime has to have that conversation with somebody else's kid? Like, you would never go to your employer and be like, hey, Bob, I don't know if I can come to work on Tuesday. My old man just got arrested for a sting operation. I would not. You won't have that conversation. But in the Marine Corps, I got to have that conversation.
And I think that's like, one of the differences when we're talking about, people who go the college route and then like into the employers, is you're not building relationships the same way or communication the same way, where like in the Marine Corps, like these things about you, like people have to know, right? Like for the unit to operate, for things
Yeah.
to happen, for kids to go. And I think that there is just a communication that happens in the Marine Corps that, and you know, you mentioned JJ did tie buckle, but like things like tact and these type of things where
Oh yeah.
you master these leadership skills and traits so you can have these hard conversations. And again, I just like, I think it's important to spotlight like those are the conversations recruiters are having all the time, all the time.
Here's a funny one for you while we're on the subject. I had a kid one time. I was the NCOIC running a station. My Marine came to me. I was a gunny. He was a staff sergeant. He came to me and he's like, the Marine was from Jamaica. I'll never forget him. Real skinny guy. And he's like, whatever this kid's name was, he's like, he won't answer my calls. When he finally does, he told me he's not going to boot camp. He met some girl. I said, okay. I said, you talked to his mother yet? No. Why would I talk to his mother? Kid's in high school. I said, get his mother on the phone. So he gets his mother on the phone. I said, tell her what's going on. And this was part of that partnership we had to have. And this took me a little while to learn when I was first in. I was like, this is my kid. I'm going to run. Learning that parent was having them as an ally was huge. So he gets her on the phone, tells her what the deal is, and she says, come on down. Now, mom was a great person. They weren't a wealthy family. They lived in a trailer park in Pennsylvania. Uh, we pulled up, we went in, and I'll never forget her. Mom said, called the kid on the phone, said, get your ass home. He walks in the door. We're standing there. She goes, these gentlemen just told me you ain't going to boot camp. I'm not going, Mom. I'm going to stay here with whatever the girl's name was. I don't remember the kid's name. And she goes, oh, really? She have one of two choices. You can go to boot camp with them or go pack your bags right now and get out of my house. And he's like, what? She goes, you heard me. I'm not having some lazy deadbeat around my house. You think that little girl's something special? Go live with her. Get out. Go pack your bags or go with them and go to boot camp. You got a choice. And he went to boot camp. Mom laid it down. You're not going to be a lazy deadbeat. You ain't going to be in my house. And that was the partnership we had to have with these parents because they had to believe in what we believed in as much as we did. Because if they didn't, they only had you hours a day, or a couple hours a week, I should say. Mom and dad were there every day, all day. And if they were poisoning the water, there was nothing you could do about it.
Yeah.
That happened. That happened to us also where, he's not going to go. Well, no, we agree. Yeah, things have changed. And there was nothing you could do about it at that point. It was a done deal.
And I think that's, and I'm somebody who went in a little older, so I didn't have the, again, as you know, as a recruiter, 2 years after high school, even a year after high school is a big difference to that like high
Huge.
schooler. Like it is, I said that over and over in boot camp because I had to wait 6 months to enlist so that I could get the MOS I wanted. And then I was in the delayed entry program for 11 months because that's when my schoolhouse went. And so I was there. There was nobody there longer than me. Okay. There just wasn't. So by that point, I think I was 20 in boot camp, 20. Yeah, 20. It was night and day. Like the things that they would cry about in boot camp, other people that I was just like, they're calling you maggot because they don't know your name. They just met you. Or like, you
Yeah.
know, like just things that like, yeah. So it was different. It was interesting to see that. But yeah, the recruiters I worked with at RS Columbia were some of the most amazing people. My recruiter was amazing. And I don't think that recruiting gets talked about enough and the impact that it makes. Because as you said, like you directly impacted the Marine Corps, like forever and always, and the individuals.
Yeah.
And so 12 years recruiting duty, what made you decide to transition out?
Um, it was a couple of things. So I now have a bulging and protruding disc in my back. There was no more running for me, which meant my time was coming to an end there, and I could have went through the surgeries and all that kind of stuff or figured something out. The other side to it is we I got a little fed up with what we called on recruiting duty the renters. renters were officers that came out on recruiting duty, and I had some great ones. Like I just took my 7-year old to watch my old CO, who at that time was a major, retiring as a full bird colonel. We flew out to San Diego to watch him retire. Still close with the guy, phenomenal human being. At the same time, his replacement um, was as useless as useless could be, and I got tired of that transition constantly. Like, here's a great one, he's awesome, to now I got to retrain this one who thinks he understands what I'm doing and knows how this MOS works, to he's gone, okay, I got a decent one, we can train this one, to and it's frustrating because the rest of us on recruiting duty, the other 8412s, that's our MOS, we're constantly like going through that constantly. Um, and I can train a Marine to recruit. Sometimes you can't train an officer to listen, and that was the tough part. And it really finally, I truly just was over it. I had reached that point of being over that, so it was time to get out. And I got my bachelor's degree while I was in. The Marine Corps paid for that, so I had a bachelor's degree. 20 years in, I was still on the good side of retirement, where we still got 50% of our high three, all those kind of things. And I was good with it. And I was like, all right, it's time to go. So I moved on, and I probably, even where I was at here in the capital region of New York, it had been hard for me to even stay there. I got there in 2009. I retired in 2014. Um, it wouldn't have taken long before I maybe had another year or two left in that station before they'd have been like, all right, we're going to move you to
Yeah.
somewhere else, or somewhere district. And I had kids in school. I was like, I'm not. So it was time.
And I think too, and the other thing, like when you talk about, new officers and people coming in, that community. And so there's sometimes like there's things again that you like can't argue these things because these people in the community. And as you're talking about, like that is like the influencers, that's the impact. That is your educators workshop, you're like these
Oh
programs that
yes.
are the amount of touch points that have to happen that I think a lot of times is just lost on some of that, some of that. And so I completely understand that. So you decide to get out, you retire, you have your bachelor's. What do you decide to do then next?
Well, when I first got out, I took advantage of the programs that were there at the time. They, what was it? I can't think of the job fair. It's changed now. It used to be a live job fair, and now they do it all virtually, which I don't like it personally. But they had a fair that was just for service members. I went checking into different stuff and interviewed a few places. I will tell you, one of the hardest transitions was civilians not understanding our MOSs and what I had a bachelor's in human resource management, been recruiting for 12 years, uh, trained in all kinds of sales and all this stuff. And I've got all this under my belt, and to hear civilian companies tell me things like, you know what, thank you for your service. And we know you did that job, but you didn't do it here. And I'm like, what does that matter? You want to pay me $20 an hour and I'm a retired gunnery sergeant. I've got all these credentials, and they wouldn't even get anywhere near the money I needed. So I ended up actually, my first job was I worked for CSX as a train master, very pro military company, very easy to transition over. But the tough part there was they wanted me to be. Do you know where Willard, Ohio is? Do you know where that is?
I don't.
Yeah, neither does anybody else.
Yeah,
I
and I'm
mean,
from
that's
Indiana, and I have no idea where that is.
I was in, I've been to Goshen, Indiana, and I was in where did they where was I at in Indiana? I actually did some time in Indiana on the railroad. Um,
Oh,
but so I can't think of the name of the city we were again with it,
I'm
whatever.
from
I can't
Lafayette, Purdue University.
It actually wasn't far from there. It was a little town, but nonetheless. But I did that for about 10 months, and my family wasn't willing to move out there. Nobody was, and I knew somebody over who I had a connection with Amtrak. So I actually ended up going to work for Amtrak for 7 years. Great job. I tell people all the time I'd probably still be with Amtrak if it wasn't for COVID. But watched 40 people get furloughed under me, and I was like, this is not what I want. I got a call to from a friend. Hey, are you looking for work? At the time, I really wasn't. And he's like, well, look, we're I work for a staffing company, recruiting again,
Yeah.
and they want to open an office in Albany. I know you're there. Are you interested? And they were the largest staffing firm in what they call the North Country here in New York, so up around the Plattsburgh area.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of working both jobs at the same time. And that saying, man can't serve two masters, I had to make a decision. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to get off the railroad. I'll go do this. I did that for a couple of years. And every one of those pieces helped me along the lines, from my time in the Marine Corps, how it set me up, understanding goals, process, doing things, achievements, uh, being on the railroad, dealing with people, their concerns, manage it, like herding cats some days, all those things, to working for. This was the first private company I'd ever worked for. So seeing how they worked, I was working with. I did everything in recruiting, from calling companies, finding employees, writing contracts, um, every piece to it. It's funny. I talked to a guy out in California I know who's in the recruiting world, and I told him one time what I was doing. He was like, "You're doing everything." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm doing everything." He's like, "But I could probably get you 5 million in funding, and we start our own company." And he was dead serious. And at that time, I wasn't prepared to run my own thing.
Yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "Like you're you're doing too." His name's Marcus. He's like, every job you're doing in a typical firm, there's somebody who does each part of that. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah. He's like, there's somebody who sorts candidates, who gives them to recruiters. That recruiter finds them a job and sets them up with an interview. There's somebody who sources companies, who then the sales team works with them. And then there's somebody else in legal that's putting the contract. I was doing all of it. And and I and it kind of, again, back to that. I'm At that time I was 44, 45, and here I am answering to a kid who's 28 because his mother owned the company, and great lady, and he was very knowledgeable of the field because he grew up in it. So I would never take that from him. But where he failed was things that were important to me, and I would think to you, which were leadership things. And like I had this team. I was getting ready to fire one of the guys, and they there was a they were getting. This is so funny. So I had tore my ACL, MCL, meniscus all at once. I'm in a brace. They were going to go visit with a client because I couldn't go over there, and he looked. The guy looked like he had just been at a wedding the night prior, with a white shirt on. There's so many wrinkles in it. It looked like he was ready to cut himself. Uh, Pants wrinkled, shirt half untucked. The girl, she's in, like, I don't remember what her shirt was, but I remember her jeans. She had jeans on, which is fine to me, but they had like the knees on them were opened up. And I'm like, where are you two going? Well, we're gonna go visit. I was like, you do not visit clients dressed like that. Like, we're professionals. We need to present ourselves that way. Well, they were just, oh. So they went, said something to him. Again, he's 28, 29 years old at the time. And they cried to him. So he told him it was fine. Instead of coming to me and saying, hey, we're okay with this as a dress code, it's not an issue, let me deal with that. He told him it was fine. I was like, bud, and this is something I think a lot of civilians don't understand if they've never been in our shoes. I'm like, you understand that I can never tell them anything again. He's like, what? It's like, you cut my knees out for me. I was like, you took any authority I had away from me in that conversation. No, I didn't do it. I was like, yes, you did. And that was my first real foray into trying to teach somebody who realizing, like, you know what? He doesn't have to listen to me. I can't teach him. He's got, he's driving around in a Tesla, you know, running off to Florida when he wants to. That was always a fun one. There's one. Listen, folks, if you're a civilian listening to this, don't be hiding off in Florida when it's wintertime in the Northeast and then complaining about your staff not making it to the office in time. Don't do that. They don't want to hear you shoveling sunshine while they're shoveling snow. They don't want to hear that. But these were the things I was dealing with, and I realized, let me see if I can do it better myself.
Yeah.
And from there, that's how I own my own. I own a franchise with 2 territories. I'm able to take an hour today and talk to you, and I have all the freedom in the world to do so.
And you also started a podcast on top of starting your own firm. You also started a podcast.
I have that for 4 years now, the Above the Bar podcast. And it's very similar to what you and I are doing right now. I love conversations. And the idea of it is like, if somebody walked into a bar and sat down and looked at the bartender, and the bartender was like, hey, Tab, you was like into marketing or something. Yes, I was a marketing marine. I did these things, public affairs. It should feel that way. We've been doing that for 4 years now. We've done over 250 episodes. It's live every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it could be anything. Like, I've had psychics on. I've had multi-million-dollar. I had a multi-million-dollar brain. I have to introduce you to him. David, what's David's name? Pierre, P-E-R-E, who was a broke reservist and figured out how to buy real estate. Now is a multi-millionaire. So I have a little bit of everybody on, and we have great conversations. This week, I'm really looking forward to the girl I'm talking to this week. She's originally born in the Middle East and has written a book basically about being an Arabian woman and achieving beyond what her social standards should be, and having a different level of life and respect for herself, and getting beyond where she grew up at, they said she should be. And I can't wait to have that conversation.
And that gives me chills. And that's like why I wanted to start this podcast too. It's like we all have stories that like people can learn from, and like just even like perception, like challenge. I think like we have to challenge our own perceptions and preconceived notions. And I like that's something like I tell people all the time, because like you are a product of like what you intake, which means you have to challenge that, right? Because like your world is small, and the more you can hear the things that people go through, and I think that like and I looked at your podcast and I listened to a few episodes, and that was one of the things I loved, was like the variety of guests. Like it was just like in conversations, and it's like this is so interesting, because in the setting, in the way of just people talking and conversing, right? Because at least for me, I process way more that way. When somebody like tells me the story, or I hear something in a story, it sticks. And I just love unfiltered.
1,000%.
Yeah. And I just
1,000%.
love, and I love unfiltered because I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a Marine that I'm just like, yeah.
I love it on my show when people are like, they'll say like shit or something, like to be like, oh my God, can I cuss on here? I'm like, I'm drinking bourbon right now. You do what you need to do.
Which I will say, that was how mine started. But now that we're on Race Across America Radio, sadly, we do limit the cussing, but it's because it's on the radio and fair, right? But when we started, I was the
Yes.
problem. I was the problem. When we had to change, it wasn't my guest. It was like me, not like OFP life. Like I joke all the time, like OFP life is my jam.
I love it.
What advice would you give to and I think the leadership, and I think you being a recruiter, I think like advice on leadership and like, the conversation of you having somebody so young that doesn't have certain leadership experience. What advice would you give really to anybody on how can they become a better leader, and why is it important to focus on those skill sets and not just your career?
Well, I would say study, learn, and build your toolbox. And what I mean by that is, you know, in the Marine Corps, we're kind of taught watch other leaders, and then when you get to be this rank, you can go to a formal school on it. Where the commandant has his reading list and all, but we're never really taught a lot of read this book on leadership, study this, theory on leadership. We're more so taught watch everyone around you, or you're thrust into leadership. And at worst case scenario, if you can't get them to listen by your words, beat them into submission, and eventually they will. You know, it's those kind of things. But one of the things I've learned since getting out of the Marine Corps is, my son's grabbing his book bag is real quick here. But one of the things that I have learned is that I've become a better leader, I feel like, because I spend more time studying leadership and more time reading books. Because I'm in my van all the time, I've listened to Henry Ford's my life my way, Dale Carnegie, Carnegie. Gosh, I can't think of his name right now. Carnegie. I can't think of his first name, but I've a lot more of these books, and listening to books about Ulysses S. Grant, figuring out like, how did these guys do it? How did they survive to become immortal names with leadership? And you find out that most leadership is still based on a foundation. So that would be the advice I would give somebody is, you get in the service, learn that functional leadership, but don't forget to read leadership and get some more base foundation, some scientific study on it.
I don't know, every time I don't know where the time goes, and I have utterly enjoyed our conversation. But before I ask the last question, I want to make sure that there's not anything that we didn't talk about that you want to bring up or you want to talk about.
Well, we're going to finish this conversation when you're on my podcast.
Perfect.
So they can all, and I'm not my calendar is on my phone, so I don't want to jump into my calendar, but I believe you're coming up in January, is it? I think it's January.
I think January is what. Yeah, I'll have to go back and look too.
And I'll go, but we'll post it and everything. So that would be the only other thing, is make sure if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you come join us on the Above the Bar podcast, and we'll finish it there. There'll
Yes,
be a little more swear words.
yes. So the last question I always ask, and this isn't a yes or no, it's just more of an opportunity to kind of like wrap up your Marine Corps experience. But if you had to take the oath again, would you? Or if you had the option to, would you?
Got it. I mean, it's made me who I am today. There's no doubt in my mind I would take it again. And people who say, "Oh, I'd never do," I'd never, you're a liar. Because even if you think your time in the Marine Corps sucked, it still made you who you are. It built the foundation for who you are today. So, absolutely.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Shawn's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. His sacrifices matter. His stories matter. Not every Marine story is the same. We didn't all join the Marine Corps for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took, an oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.